This is Sarah Squires bringing you behind the headlines in today's edition of WyoToday Newsroom. Today, I am joined on the show by U.S. Representative Harriet Hageman. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. It's wonderful to be back with you. Time seems to fly, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Another month has gone by. We're so blessed to have you, Representative Hageman, join us on our WyoToday Newsroom program every month and get an update on the work that you're doing on our behalf in D.C. Obviously, the news of the day here is the federal government shutdown, and I'm wondering if you can just kind of give us the latest about what is happening up on Capitol Hill.
So how about if we, start at the beginning here of how we got into this position. So quite some time ago, around the 19th of September, I believe it was, the House of Representatives voted to do what's called a continuing resolution, or a CR. And what a CR does is it just continues funding the government at the same level as it's been funded over the last year. So no changes, no cuts, just continuing with government operations. Now, oftentimes in the past, those things have been kind of Christmas treed. In other words, there's all kinds of things that are added to them, a variety of priorities for whatever party is in the position of power at the time. They'll add all kinds of things onto a continuing resolution. Those are called anomalies. This time, we didn't do that. We just essentially issued a clean CR saying we're going to continue to fund the government until November 21st so that we can keep working on our appropriations bills. So far, the House has passed 3 appropriations bills. The Senate has passed 3. We need to get to 12. And then we were going to go into conference committee with those 6 bills. And our appropriations committee has actually passed all 12 of the appropriations bills out of committee. And we were going to be debating those on the floor and moving forward with them. The Republicans voted in favor of that. The Democrats voted against it, but it did pass, and it went to the Senate. And it's the Senate Democrats that are now holding that up and have rejected it and have refused to approve or vote in favor of that clean CR to fund the government. Now, what are some of their complaints? What is it that they want? They want to increase funding. They want to go back to funding NPR and PBS, $500 million. They want $500 million for that alone. They're asking for an additional $1.5 trillion in spending between now and November 21st. They want health care for illegal aliens. Now, they keep saying it doesn't say that we want health care for illegal aliens, but in fact it does. If you go to page 27 of their bill, which is very lengthy, but if you go to page 27 of their bill, it actually repeals the work that we did in July of this year in our reconciliation package, making sure that health care was not going to illegal aliens. So they absolutely are trying to fund health care for illegal aliens. And then probably one of the biggest ones is they keep talking about the extension of the tax credits for health care, for health insurance. So if you'll remember, Obamacare was supposed to be the be-all and end-all of everything. And provide health care. I mean, it was rainbows and unicorns, and Obamacare was just going to solve all crises associated with health care in this country. And ultimately what it did is destroy our health care system. But setting that aside, there are benefits there are that can be had, tax credits and money that is to help people pay for Obamacare. Prior to COVID, if you made 4 times above the poverty level, you received subsidies to pay your Obamacare premiums. In 2021, the Democrats, through a reconciliation package, and ostensibly because of COVID, they extended that to make it unlimited. So you can be a millionaire in this country and you can get Obamacare subsidies. There is no limit because that's what the Democrats voted on under Joe Biden, and ostensibly to address COVID. They made it unlimited as to who was entitled to Obamacare subsidies. That expired, but they also had it expire in December of 2025. So the Democrats are the ones that voted on this through a reconciliation package. This was not the Republicans that did this. as of December, because of what they did through reconciliation, the subsidies for millionaires are going away. But for anyone who makes 4 times the level of poverty level, they will continue to get their subsidies. And that is what they're fighting over. They're wanting to continue those subsidies at unlimited levels, and it's going to cost billions, hundreds of billions of dollars, $400 billion. It's massive amounts of money that they're trying to continue spending to prop up Obamacare.
So we know the Democrats are really framing this around this healthcare piece. And, we're getting estimates from a variety of different sources about what premium increases that people are going to see on the ground. And we're not talking about, millionaires here. So according to the, the Kaiser Family Foundation, estimates that a 60-year-old couple in Wyoming earning $100,000 a year are going to see, under a bronze plan through the marketplace, their premiums go from $0 a month to $2,642 a month, and that a 40-year-old couple with 2 kids earning $80,000 a year are going to see their premiums go from just under $3,500 a year to $6,000 a year. Can you explain maybe the dissonance here when we're talking about subsidies for incredibly wealthy people, and then we're also talking about premium increases, or at least some of these organizations that have their hands in the fine details of how this marketplace, these changes are going to work. What are we going to see on the ground here, Representative Hageman?
So I would have to look at those numbers. I'm not sure that I agree with those numbers, but if you're looking at the numbers that they're talking about, that's what my point is. Under Obamacare and prior to the Democrats voting on this these COVID benefits, that's what they would pay. That's what I'm saying. That's why Obamacare was such a bad deal to begin with, because it's created this distorted marketplace. That's the problem with it. And that's exactly what the Democrats did in 2021 when they put in place this temporary subsidy for people, for an unlimited amount of money or unlimited subsidies, regardless of what you make. So what you're saying is a couple that is making $100,000 a year, because of Obamacare, they're going to have to pay their premiums. That's what the law has been. The Democrats put in place a temporary, that's the word that they used, a temporary subsidy that went into effect 4 years ago that is set to expire this year. They're the ones that voted on that. They're the ones that put that temporary plan in place. So again, what they did is they made it so that you can make any amount of money. You can be a millionaire and you are entitled to Obamacare subsidies under what they did 4 years ago. That's what they're holding out on, is to continue subsidies, unlimited subsidies, for people who make massive amounts of money. The cost is $400 billion. It's not free. We're paying for this, and that is what I think people need to understand. This was a temporary program that was put in place because of COVID. We're trying to get the Democrats to understand COVID is over. COVID is over. All this does is revert back to the plan, to the program that was in place prior to the Democrats using reconciliation to give massive benefits to wealthy people in this country. So I would have to look at those numbers. But what I'm telling you is this is what the Democrats put in place 4 years ago. It was a temporary plan to deal with COVID. That is what they're fighting over. It has a $400 billion price tag. That's part of the $1.5 trillion that they're demanding that we spend over the next 6 weeks in order for them to agree to reopen the government.
Yeah. I think that we are sort of seeing, the healthcare landscape, the insurance landscape sort of change under our feet. And, a lot of us, whether we use the marketplace or we have private insurance here, I think in the last week or two, we got an op-ed from Blue Cross Blue Shield of Wyoming. And, it was touching on some of these increases coming to the marketplace. And I think what it said was something like, we see increases in health insurance premiums because of the choices that we make. And it sort of felt like it was signaling, well, everything's going to go up, guys. Do you see some compromise here, or maybe some new plans for how the government, obviously what we're seeing here isn't working for a lot of families, or it's just not going to work down the line. Do you see something new on the horizon when it comes to, the federal government being involved in health insurance?
Well, this is the problem with having the government involved in this, right? I mean, what they did is they broke the insurance. They broke insurance. They fundamentally changed. Obamacare fundamentally changed the way that we deal with health issues and healthcare and insurance in the United States. And many of us were warning 15 years ago when they were trying to pass this. We were warning that this doesn't work. All you need to do is look at the European model, and it demonstrates that it doesn't work. People come here to get health care because if they go under their single payer system in Europe, there are millions upon millions upon millions of people on waiting lists in England just to get basic health care. Whereas you can walk into a doctor's office here and you can get it relatively easy. But that is not the plan for what Obamacare wanted. Obamacare was designed to push us into the European model and have a single-payer system, and it's what we have been fighting back against for the last 15 years because we know it's a failed form of health care. When the government takes over health care, they don't worry anymore about providing health care. They worry about controlling costs. And that's what we're seeing right here because everything explodes. Yes, some of the insurance providers, they want these subsidies to continue because they're the direct beneficiary of these. Mm-hmm. What we need to do, and we have tried numerous times, the Republicans have tried numerous times, and the Democrats have fought back every single time. We have tried to fix Obamacare. We have tried to come in. The effort several years ago in the first Trump administration would have saved $800 billion with the reforms that the Republicans were pursuing then, and the Democrats fought back at every single turn. But again, what we're fighting over right now is the Democrats are pandering to their most liberal, radical base. They have been told that they cannot work with the Republicans. They cannot work with President Trump. And that's why they have thrown this bill out there that they know is a non-starter because it absolutely is impossible. Why in the world would anyone want us? Why would any of our constituents, with a government that is $37 trillion in debt, why would any of our constituents want us to agree to increase spending by $1.5 trillion just over a 6-week period? That is absurd. That is absolutely absurd. And that's what the Democrats are demanding. They know it's a non-starter. So what does that tell you? They're using this shutdown to block our ability to do the reforms that the American public voted for last November. This is their way of preventing the government from operating. This isn't about policy. This isn't about protecting health care. They're the ones that voted this in 4 years ago, that this would be a temporary subsidy. This is about blocking our effort to implement the policies that the American public want. I was just reviewing a poll today, a Harvard poll, demonstrating that what President Trump is doing is very, very, very popular among the citizens of this country. And the Democrats are trying to find a way to derail his agenda.
Yeah, I was checking out some recent polling here, and I thought it was curious that there was a poll of American citizens asking, who they think is to blame for this government shutdown. And I thought, what a preposterous poll. Why don't we figure out who really is to blame rather than, just try to weigh people's sentiment? And, of course, we know that for these appropriation bills, we need more than a simple majority. If that were the case, they would have been passed by now. Do you see anyone kind of extending a hand across the aisle here, or are we really locked into, what sort of feels like a showdown? I mean, what do you think is going to happen, Representative Hageman?
Well, we have to reopen the government. I mean, it's just that simple. I am horrified by the fact that this has happened. We have to reopen the government. The idea that the Democrats would oppose a clean CR that simply keeps the government operating at the same levels over the next 6 months, I think tells you that there's a political agenda behind this that has nothing to do with what is in the best interest of the American public. We have to reopen the government. We need to make sure that our military is being paid, that with the WIC program, the Women, Infants, and Children program is available for low-income mothers who need those resources. I know that the president is right now moving money around to make sure that that program stays viable so that, again, the people who need it are able to access those resources. And so I know that he is attempting to make sure that those kinds of things remain available. But at the same time, this is not the way to run a railroad. We should be able to function as a government as we are negotiating appropriations bills. And so when you say, is there a hand across the aisle, I'll tell you what the hand across the aisle was. By passing a clean CR. We didn't Christmas tree it. We didn't put policy writers on there. We didn't try to advance agenda items by holding the federal government hostage. We didn't try to do the kinds of policy programs or policies that I would like to see passed. We did not attach those to this CR and then tell the Democrats, vote for it or else you're shutting down the government. We didn't do that. We said we're going to continue funding government as is. Please vote for this so that we can continue doing our work. It's the Democrats that said, nope, we're going to hold the federal government hostage, and unless you're willing to spend an additional $1.5 trillion on funding NPR and PBS, why would that be an emergency? Why would anyone think it's appropriate to NPR and PBS are self-funding? They are absolutely self-funding. I listen to NPR as I travel across this state almost every single day. It has more advertisements than your for-profit stations. It's totally self-funding. Why would they demand that we spend $500 million on NPR and PBS before they're willing to reopen the government? That's got to give you an idea of where their priorities lie, and they're not with the American people.
Well, we certainly wish you the best as you work through this. I know, it does feel like a standoff, and I think that's because it truly is. But, the American people, we want our federal government to be at work on our behalf. And so we're really hopeful that you'll be able to work something out here to keep us going. And thank you for your continued efforts on that, Representative Hageman. I wanted to switch gears a little bit here. Over the weekend, this past weekend, I took my mom to Laramie, and we were driving and we were checking out this gigantic wind farm. And of course, she and I are from the Midwest. We're not unfamiliar with wind farms, but we both kind of, as we drove along, said, you know what, this is the biggest one we've ever seen. And we started wondering, what else could that land be used for? And, I know that sometimes these wind and solar projects can be pretty controversial here on the ground, but we also, wanted to talk about some of these federal programs that provide these giant subsidies, that come from taxpayer dollars for things like solar panels. And I noticed that was a topic that you had taken up recently, that the idea of subsidies for solar projects that can really take out giant tracts of farmland from production. And I'm wondering if you can kind of give us the latest on what's going on with that.
So one of the things I'm trying to do is I'm trying to block using prime farmland for wind and solar projects. There is no reason why we should be giving up the prime farmland that we have for these projects. I think, first of all, that's an absolutely absurd use of this real property. And so that's one of the things that I've been working on to try to block. There are massive subsidies for these wind and solar projects because they have to be, because they are so inefficient. And the only way that they really operate is if you also then have massive battery installations that go along with them. Battery installations that really can only operate for store about 4 hours worth of electricity. It's part of why they're so astoundingly expensive and so incredibly inefficient. The other problem that I have with them is these battery facilities are so terribly dangerous. You may remember, and your listeners may remember, that horrible fire at Moss Landing out in California that started in California's largest battery installation, and just went on for days and weeks and months because they couldn't get it put out because it was so many batteries, and it's almost impossible to put them out once they start on fire. I agree with you in terms of the land use. I have been looking at the efficiency. They're less than 25% as efficient as a gas-fired power plant or a coal-fired power plant, yet the cost of them, as I mentioned a moment ago, is very, very high. And so they only work as if there's massive federal subsidies. And this administration, and I support this administration has said we're not going to continue to waste taxpayer money on these projects. They can stand on their own or they can't. It's up to them. But we're not going to continue to subsidize them. I also have one more thing to say, and I know in Wyoming we love our landscapes, we love our viewscapes, our sunsets, and our sunrises. And I don't like the idea that they're turning our beautiful vistas into industrial zones. The area between Cheyenne and Laramie, I think, is one of the most beautiful areas in the entire world. I love looking to the south and seeing those valleys. I love Vidavoo. I love coming out onto the plains when you're driving from Laramie to Cheyenne. And I really am horrified by what they've done with that beautiful area with all of those windmills.
Yeah. So one other thing I wanted to go over with you, Representative Hageman, is some news that we got here. It's kind of I think a badge of honor, but your office has delivered, we kind of crossed this $10 million threshold in what's called casework relief for constituents. And it's my understanding that's when your staff members step in when folks here in Wyoming are having problems with the federal government or some government entity, whether they're owed money or something like that. And I'm wondering if you can kind of just roll out what this casework really is for folks and how they can get help through your office.
So I'm going to give my staff all the credit in the world. I think I have the very best staff in all of Washington, D.C. They are so dedicated to Wyoming. But what happens is that with all the federal agencies, and there's over 400 federal agencies, and some of those agencies are very forward. I mean, they directly impact the citizens of Wyoming and the citizens of every state. The obvious ones are the Social Security Administration, the Medicare and Medicaid Services, the IRS, the VA. Those are some of the more obvious types of agencies that our citizens interact with on a very regular basis, but there are times that they don't do what they're supposed to do. For example, the IRS may withhold somebody's income tax return, and while they expected to have it, by July, it may be a year later and they still don't have their income tax return or their income tax refund. You may have a situation, where the VA is supposed to reimburse for mileage or medication for a particular veteran, and they don't ever get those reimbursement payments made. So what happens is if you have an issue with a federal agency, there are circumstances where a citizen may have entered into a settlement agreement with a particular federal agency. Maybe they built a road on your property and they shouldn't have, and then they won't pay for it. And so if one of our constituents is having an issue with a federal agency, they can call our office and they will open up a case file and we will start investigating it and find out what in the world happened here. Why is that, $3,500 refund from the IRS? Why didn't that come in? Why has the VA not paid that $3,000 reimbursement that they owe? So these are not necessarily high dollar amounts, but they are incredibly important for our constituents, and we will try to knock those payments loose, I guess is the best way to put it. And in my 2.5, almost 3 years in office now, we have been able to recover over $10.6 million for citizens of Wyoming. We have resolved over 4,000 cases where our citizens were not being treated right by these administrative agencies, these federal agencies. So I'm constantly encouraging people, if you have a problem with a federal agency, get a hold of my office and we'll see if we can fix it.
I wanted to point out that a lot of work that is done by your office isn't even counted in these figures. If you think about, folks who are waiting on permits, or other issues that don't involve some sort of financial component, or at least not a payment to them, I know that your office has intervened in so many different ways for folks who are having problems with the federal government. And I just encourage people who, no matter what the situation is, if you're having trouble with a federal agency, Representative Hageman's staff is absolutely the best place to turn to. I know you guys really deliver results, so I wanted to thank you so much for that work that you guys do on our behalf. I hear from people all the time who, they've tried so many different ways to resolve their issue, and it finally ends up happening once they reach out to your staff.
Well, I very much appreciate that. That's very kind of you to say, because it is important work. In fact, I think it's some of the most important work that we do. The federal government has become so pervasive in our lives in so many ways, and that's why it is important that you have an advocate in Washington and here in Wyoming that can help navigate working with these agencies. As you say, it may be a permit issue. It might be a situation where they closed a road that you have to be able to access to get to your cows. There can be a lot of different reasons as to why we intervene with agencies, and part of it is the returning of the money, but there's other reasons as well. And so thank you for pointing that out.
Well, it's really inspiring to see. I mean, we elected you to go to DC and to, straighten out some of these national issues, but sometimes straightening out what's going wrong with the federal government, happens right here on the ground, in our own families, our own property, our own businesses, and so that work is so appreciated. And I also want to thank you so much once again for joining us on WyoToday Newsroom this morning, Representative Hageman. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you, Sarah. We'll talk to you soon.